This content may be upsetting, disturbing, or traumatic for some viewers, so I just wanted to give a heads up. Thank you.
Mothers, don't you know the pain you've caused your sons? Daddies, don't you know some hurts can't be undone? So be careful what you sow, they gonna reap it soon. Just be careful or they'll end up just like you. Mothers, hold your daughters and your sons. Fathers, show your children how to love. You gotta take their hands to lift them up again. Love your children. Love your children.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the podcast, The Legacies That Trauma Creates. This podcast will be a focus on intergenerational trauma as well as talk a little bit about childhood trauma. Initially, I wanted to create a podcast on the legacies that are passed down from parents to children as far as talents and ideas and just genetics. But the more that I looked at it and the more that I uncovered, the more I realized that there's also a unspoken, not so much unspoken, but definitely unwanted legacy that's also passed down, and that's trauma as well. A lot of the time, traumas are passed down generationally, and that's something that this podcast will put a focus on. This topic can be heavy and even painful to some people, but I hope to bring some awareness and some clarity to it, and even healing to anyone who wishes to listen. Within this podcast, I will be sharing research that I have uncovered and discovered, as well as sharing some of the stories that I've read and even my own past experiences, as well as the experiences of others that I have received permission to share with you all. Discussing trauma is so important to me because growing up, I saw a lot of things that I didn't like. I seen a lot of things that I didn't agree with. I also seen a lot of things that I didn't understand, and it just made life confusing for me. It made life difficult. It was hard to believe people and just understand that people cared. I was extremely angry and I would blow up, or I just became depressed and just kind of numb and walk through life. And that's no way to live. That's no way to process that. It's very difficult to process your emotions through that time because the whole time you're trying to understand the emotions of the people around you, but you also don't quite understand your own emotions. And the filter that you're looking through everything is not clear. This has also led me to come to the realization that many people live in a state like that, or they used to live in a state like that. And trying to face the pain in those moments are extremely difficult. Trying to process it is extremely difficult. And one of the things that led me to want to be better was when I became a mother. Having my children was one of the most terrifying things for me because it came at a time that I wasn't in the best situation in my life, and me and their dad wasn't in the best situation either. And so, like, one of the reasons I didn't want to have kids was fear. And that's because I didn't want to turn out like my parents. I didn't want to do to children the same way that my parents did to me. Um, I didn't want to do that to anyone else. And when I found out I was pregnant and I was going to have kids, I had two options. I could either get an abortion and go about my life, or I can choose to have that child and be better and do better. And there were things my parents did that was great. They weren't completely horrible people. There was a lot of things that I believe they did out of the best of what they knew. And when I started raising my own kids, I was like, okay, these are the things that they did well. These are the things that they did that I did not like. And so just trying to navigate that and just work through that and realizing that I had a lot of pain, and having my kids around really brought it out. That it was just the littlest things would sometimes just set me off. And before, I probably was like, oh yeah, I'm angry sometimes, but I don't really have an anger issue. Having kids made me realize that those things that I would bottle up, they had a way of shaking those bottles. And so they would come to the top, and I would either lash out at them or I would have to deal with it. And there were like plenty of times I made mistakes and had to go back and correct them. But having them made me want to figure out what was wrong with me. Like, why was I feeling the way that I was feeling? Why was I dealing with some of the things that I was dealing with? Having them made me realize that I didn't grow up with a healthy family dynamic. I didn't know what a healthy family dynamic looked like. So I wasn't sure how to show them that, how to give them that. And it was a process. It just made me realize that growing up, I saw a lot of things that, number one, no kid should ever see, but also the interactions between my family member wasn't always, it wasn't healthy. One of the things that I would grow up seeing a lot is when my grandma and my aunt would get into an argument. Like, they love each other. They did. They still do. But I also noticed that there was some unhealthy things. And when my grandma would get really upset with my aunt, she would call her a slave. She would call her a slave, or, and I'm not even going to say the other one, but she would call her a slave. And it wasn't just the word that she said, but it was also the way that she said it, that even as a child, like, it would hit my heart in a painful way. And I remember one day, I had to be about maybe 11. I was like, hey, grandma, like, why do you call her that? Like, I don't think that's nice. Like, I don't think you should call her that anymore. And I'm sure she did for a while, but also I don't think I heard it as much. So if she did, it just wasn't said around me. But like, I remember hearing that, and like, the anguish I would see on my aunt's face. Like, you just don't, those things just don't go away. Like, you see that pain there, and you're like, huh, this is what mothers and daughters do? Like, I didn't live with my mom growing up. I lived with my dad. And so on the times I seen my mom was either asleep or she was like, all right, bye. Like, watch your brother. I'm gone. And so I was like, do I either want a mom around that yells at me all the time, or do I want a mom that just disappears every time I come around? I guess I gotta pick my options. Having those things swirling inside of me and all around me, along with the other many things that I experienced and witnessed growing up, it just helped me to understand that I was a product of what was happening around me. And I had a choice of continuing that cycle with my own children, or of being different, being better, and just trying. But now that I got the introduction out of the way, let's talk about what is trauma and why it's important. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration describes individual trauma as an event or circumstances resulting in physical harm, emotional harm, and or life-threatening harm. The event or circumstances has lasting adverse effects on the individual's mental health, physical health, emotional health, social well-being, and or spiritual well-being. And the American Psychological Association defines trauma as any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, disassociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have long-lasting negative effects on a person's attitude, behavior, and other aspects of functioning. Traumatic events include those caused by human behavior as well as by nature, and often challenge an individual's view of the world as just, safe, and a predictable place. A traumatic event is based on the person who experiences. And although even two people can experience the same event happening at the same time, the reactions that they have afterwards may be different. So it's important not to compare how you feel about a traumatic experience to someone else. Perfect example, me and my sister, we grew up in the same household. We experienced a lot of the same things, yet we both feel differently about certain things that happen. And one of the things that I make sure that I don't do is ever diminish anything that she feels is profound to her, because that's how she experienced it. Another example is also in You Are Your Best Thing. Laverne Cox wrote an essay called Hurt People, and she explained how her grandfather was abusive, but also all of his children seem to experience it differently. Unfortunately, traumatic events are common in in our world. They can begin when you feel frightened, humiliated, rejected, abandoned, dismissed, unsafe, unshamed, unsupported, trapped, powerless. The feelings can stem from war, illnesses, witnessing acts of violence, childhood neglect, accidents, natural disasters, all forms of abuse, grief, and loss. A study was done in 2015 by the World Mental Health Survey Consortium, and they discovered that 70% of respondents reported being exposed to at least one traumatic event, and 30.5% were exposed to at least four or more. They noticed that the traumatic event that was the most common was the unexpected death of a lost one. Also, let's not forget the COVID-19 pandemic was a worldwide traumatic event that generated a range of traumatic symptoms within people all across the globe. Since trauma affects every person differently, the negative lasting effects range from subtle to highly destructive. The effects can show up in risky behaviors, mental health, chronic physical pains, and in emotional dysregulation. One person may only have one effect, another person none, while a completely different person may experience several different effects. Some trauma may even lie dormant until it's triggered years later. Traumatic events can also be focused into several different types. Childhood trauma, which is one that we'll focus on, happens when you experience traumatic events as a child over long periods of time, or when you've experienced a traumatic event and support wasn't given to help you cope with some of the things you were dealing with. Collective trauma is when a traumatic event happens to a large number of people at the same time. As I've mentioned before, every person involved does not react the same way. I cannot stress this enough. Do not compare what you've experienced to someone else's and begin to downplay your pain. It is not helpful for you or healthy for you. Moral injury is a situation that goes against your morals, values, or belief. This can impact your worldview, and cause you to question yourself and the people and the things you felt secure about. Racial trauma can also have an impact on your mind and body and can lead to higher rates of PTSD within an infected community of people. Trauma can also affect you even if you weren't directly involved. This is also called secondary trauma and can also happen if you're witnessing trauma or if you're clearly connected to it. The final type of trauma we will discuss in this episode will be our area of focus along with childhood trauma. Intergenerational or generational trauma is a type of trauma that's experienced across generations of a family, culture, or group. Researchers suggest that trauma that has happened in the past may have an impact on the lives of current generations. This happens because trauma does seem to leave a chemical change on a person's genes that could be passed down. The change, however, is not a genetic mutation, but alters in the way that genes are expressed. This alteration is called epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and your environment can cause changes that affects the way your genes work. In other words, it's a switch that turns genes on and off. In studies conducted, researchers have confirmed that detrimental experiences may influence the next generation in various ways, the most common being through the behaviors of the parents. However, influence can also affect gestation and the development in sperm and eggs. During this time, epigenetic markers could be turned off and alter further development. However, not all epigenetic changes are permanent. Some epigenetic changes can be added or removed based on new changes in behaviors and or in the environment. Epigenetics play a critical role in the study of intergenerational trauma, and in the next episodes and in further episodes, we will look into it further. Thank you for tuning in with me. I'm Monique Thompson, and I'll see you next time on The Legacy Trauma Creates. Thank you.
Mothers, hold your daughters and your sons.